Oh, yeah. Afternoon jams. All right. It is officially time to kick off week one of college football. We already did week 0, so we're in form, but hopefully you guys are ready for more because we've got 11 games here. Stokastic, CFB, kind of live before lock. We're going to be taking you up to kickoff here. I am Ben Rasa. I am joined by the man himself, Matt Gajewski. We've got 11 of these bad boys, a lot of big spreads, a lot to get to. Sir, how are you feeling on this Thursday night?
I'm feeling great, man. I'm really excited for some of the rivalry games we have. Haven't had the backyard brawl in years. I'm excited to see that. Penn State playing a conference game against Purdue. We do have some FCS teams mixed into the DFS slate, which I personally don't love, but I'm just excited for the premier football we get to enjoy tonight.
It's bad. We get to talk about the Lumberjacks. That's the one positive, but a lot of big time spreads. And I want to just do this real quick because we're going to get into these games in just a second. When you see spreads like this, we talked about this a little in week 0. Is it just kind of a balancing act between targeting guys that teams, they're going to score 50 points, but their quarterback's probably watching from the sidelines in the second half?
Yeah, like back on the back end of the projections, anytime there's a team favored by more than 4 scores, the players that are starters get projected at about 85% capacity, what they normally would do. So just projecting them to get taken out at some point in the fourth quarter. That kind of sucks to project. I personally don't like slates like this, and I wish DraftKings and FanDuel wouldn't include these games. I personally don't play as much volume because you're not able to accurately project what these guys would be on the field for in their normal circumstances. So to me, I personally do not like it. I do not play as much volume on these slates, but we are here nonetheless to talk to you about your Lumberjacks, about Cal Poly, whoever it may be. If they're on the slate, we broke it down and we're going to get into it.
Absolutely. We're also going to get into another way to get some exposure night, which is on our friends at PrizePicks, who sponsors this show. If you haven't been over there, their daily prop-based contest, a different way to play. You're projecting over or under on some of these different stat categories. And of course, you see it on the screen. You're going to go over there. We'll match your first deposit of up to $100 with that promo code Awesemo, prizepicks.com. Get the link in the description as well. And there are things about like projecting the passing yards for guys like Daniels or Slovis, guys that might be tough DFS sells. But if you have a good idea on what you're going to do today, there's a lot of different ways to attack on PrizePicks.
Yeah, for sure. Slovis is a good name you bring up. He was one I looked at and he immediately stood out to me towards the under. I don't have it pulled up, but he was sitting at 264.5. I think people are kind of overlooking the fact that Pitt changed offensive coordinators and they basically went to the polar opposite guy. Mark Whipple, like top 10 in pass rate, up-tempo offense. Now they're moving to Signetti, who was a Boston College coordinator. I think people are kind of overblowing how much they ran. People forget Boston College lost their starting quarterback last year, but it's still a run-heavy offense, and everything coming out of Pitt, including the jargon from their head coach, suggests that this is going to be a really run-heavy team. So to me, if you're just taking the air out of the ball, Slovis isn't a guy who really airs it out anyway. He really struggled towards the end of his career in that air raid offense at USC. I think this is a strong under.
Yeah, and it's still sitting at 264.5. You also have the other side of the game. JT Daniels over under negative 6.5 rushing yards. That is on the slate. And with that Panthers front, he could be into some trouble there. All you need is a couple sacks and you'll be golden. JT Daniels is not going to be running around at all today.
He can't.
No, he cannot. But again, we'll be talking about that throughout the show. Great opportunity to do it, but 11 games up and soon it'll be 11 games down. Guys, you know the drill. If you want to help us out, hit that like button. Let's get the likes up right off the bat and let's get into it. Are you ready, sir? Because I'm ready.
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Starting with, I would say a gigantic spread, but they're all gigantic spreads. Ball State going in to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. It's around 5 touchdowns. I think 35.5 on my screen. Over under of 66.5. Let's start with the Cardinals. Obviously, they're not the team that you want to be targeting, but are they a throwaway team or are there a couple guys that we might want to look to on potential run backs?
Yeah, they're a team undergoing a lot of change, but I think with the overall game environment, you could look to a run back in this situation. Brand new signal caller. We don't really know what he's going to offer, so I'm not targeting Paddock by himself. And then this run game is going to be a timeshare. You saw that basically the case last year. They used Carson Steele, and it was basically a pass catching back here and early down grinder back here. When you're such big underdogs, I don't think you target that. But in the past game, you have Ja'Shawn Jackson, Heinz Tyler. These guys are cheap enough for a team that should be throwing the ball. Like Ja'Shawn Jackson saw 108 targets last year. This is a proven commodity. And if Tennessee takes their foot off the gas in the second half, which we've seen them do in the past, you remember they played Bowling Green, I think it was opening day. It was one of these MAC teams.
Yeah,
but anyway,
Bowling Green, I believe.
Yeah, they were like 38-point favorites or something, and they ended up winning the game 38-6. They scored at will in the first half, and they actually let Bowling Green kind of like not hang around, but you get what I mean. They didn't really press that lead they had, and then Bowling Green was able to put up a little bit of production at the end. I think you could backdoor your way with like a Ja'Shawn Jackson here. But other than that, I'm not really targeting Ball State.
On the other side, it would seem to me, and you tell me, that a guy like Hendon Hooker is going to garner some interest, sub 9K, sitting at 8,900. What do you do with him? And then who do you pair him with if you want to target the Vols?
Yeah, Hendon Hooker's awesome, involved everywhere. So even with this game projected to get out of hand, you're not really that worried. And among the signal callers, I think he's probably the safest, because even if he plays 3 quarters, Tennessee is going to be playing real up tempo during that time he's on the field, scoring a ton of points. Hendon Hooker had an awesome game they were splitting time with Joe Milton at the time, but we've seen a lot of production from this offense when it's actually on the field. If you're stacking him, which I think is probably a good idea, they're not the pass heaviest team, but again, they run so many raw plays that they get off a fair share of pass attempts too. Cedric Tillman is a straight up monster, over 1,000 yards last year. They have a lot of players leaving. Velus Jones is gone for this team. If you want to go the cheaper route, completely fine with Jalen Hyatt. He's a guy that should be stepping into a larger role, played about 40% of the time last year, only 10% target share. But again, they lost some pretty good talent up at the top, aside from Tillman. And then if you're just throwing darts, Brew, McCoy, and Jimmy Callaway were listed as co-starters. They're going to get a lot of run in this game, especially in the second half when this game is kind of blown out of proportion. And I think they want to get a look at Brew McCoy, the former 5-star, hasn't really gotten on the field at this point in his career. He could be a very big playmaker for this team down the stretch. So at 4K, I'm taking a couple shots with Brew McCoy in these stacks.
Yeah, certainly had the pedigree in terms of the recruiting acumen. Not going to be super popular. We'll talk about some of the tools that we have over at Stokastic showing us that as well. Anything in the backfield for Tennessee, or are you mostly looking to Hooker and maybe some of the pass catchers?
Yeah, this backfield's awesome. Tyon Evans leaves. That basically puts Jabari Smalls in the driver's seat. But again, he's not going to handle every single carry because of how many plays they run. Jalen Wright's going to play a little bit here. Jabari Smalls is fine on DraftKings. I think his price is right in line with some of the other studs. And then on FanDuel, he's one of the better values on the slate. I think he's a top 3 running back play on FanDuel specifically, but he does everything. He can catch passes, good red zone option, no qualms with Jabari Smalls whatsoever. And then if you're trying to save some salary, Jalen Wright's going to probably flirt with double-digit carries, double-digit touches at least in this game too, now that Tyon Evans is gone. Again, Tennessee likes to use multiple backs because they run so many plays.
They're certainly going to be a team that we're going to see relevant to the slate tonight. Now, next game up, we've got the same kind of formula, MAC team going to the Slaughterhouse. Central Michigan, it won't be as bad. They're going into Stillwater, 22-point underdogs, 58-point total. I want to talk about Mr. Nichols, who at times has been extremely relevant to the DFS slate. So let's start with Central Michigan. What do you see of him in the backfield going up against this front, and who else, if anyone, can we target?
Yeah, Lou Nichols might have not only the best workload on the slate, he might have the best workload in the country. This guy was absolutely absurd down the stretch. You look at his last 4 games. This is unbelievable.
Bananas.
47 touches, 35 touches, 45 touches, 32 touches. Now, this is against MAC competition. He's going to be facing a far steeper test here. If you go back early to last year's non-con, Lou Nichols just had 23 touches against Missouri. He actually did really well in that game. He ended up with 17 touches against LSU, a team that really stifled him. And he's going to be facing a defense more in the LSU range than the Missouri range. So I'm worried about efficiency, but just raw volume. Lou Nichols has some of the best volume you can get, and it comes in the pass game. Like this guy, he has 50 catches in his career. That's unbelievable for a back in the MAC. So I think he's fine to play. He's not my favorite just because the team total for this team is a little lower. Like on the other side, I wouldn't be too surprised if like this Oklahoma State team puts up like 3 rushing touchdowns. That might be as many touchdowns as Central Michigan scores if they're lucky tonight. So you're worried about efficiency, but man, some of the touch volume here is just ridiculous.
Speaking of those rushing touchdowns on the other side, do you think that a guy like Spencer Sanders might grab one of them? The 15th year starter at QB for Oklahoma State. Obviously, he's got some mobility. What do you make of him? Where does he stack up amongst the other QBs here?
Yeah, he has kind of surprised me. I used to rip on him a lot, especially when he was a younger player. But he has a 75% adjusted completion percentage, over 7 yards per attempt, and his ADOT is 9.0. This guy throws the ball downfield more than you'd think. The issue is upside. He only has 5 career 300-yard games. He started for 3 years now. But with that said, this guy's awesome on the ground. He had nearly 700 rushing yards last year on just 146 attempts, 6 scores there. And this Oklahoma State team plays up tempo as well. That'll vary a little bit depending on opponent, but this team was 10th in play rate. It's kind of like Tennessee, where they're going to run a lot of plays. Yes, it's going to be a lot of run plays, but as long as Spencer Sanders is involved in that, he's going to be an awesome play tonight. He's too cheap for his projected role on the ground, even if that upside's a little questionable. Again, a 40-point implied team total. I'm not really worried about it here. It's not like he's facing Baylor.
Cash viable?
I think he's cash viable.
Anything else? What do you anticipate? Obviously, a guy like Chuba Hubbard's long gone. What remains in the Cowboys backfield?
Not much. They lost a lot of their backs last year. LD Brown, they lost Jalen Warren too. He was a really big player for them. But Dominic Richardson's back. He's filled in at times. He had 79 carries last year, just over 350 yards. He's actually really efficient. A lot of yards after contact for him. And they lost DeAndre Jackson. I don't know how long, but he's injured for this game. So you have even less behind him. You're starting to look at like freshman Ollie Gordon. He's a 4-star. He might get some snaps tonight just because they're so thin at running back. So Dominic Richardson might end up playing more than some of these other guys that are in blowout spots just because they don't have as many healthy bodies. And with all that said, as a guy on a 40-point implied team total team, like his workload is going to be massive tonight. I think Dominic Richardson's another underpriced back.
One of the better games on the slate, backyard brawl, West Virginia at Pitt, 7.5-point spread. Panthers are favorite. Over-under's just 51. A great game to watch. Maybe not the greatest game to target, though. Is that how you see it? And we'll start with West Virginia. And again, JT Daniels comes over. They've got a lot going for them, but this is just a tough opponent in Pitt.
I personally think so. The total is towards the low side. It's actually the lowest total on the board. And unlike tomorrow's slate, we'll talk about that when it gets here, but all those teams are basically, their spreads are like 48 to 58. Tonight, we actually do have like some 66.5, some 67-point totals where you should be focusing your time. So this game is kind of vanilla, if you want to put it that way. West Virginia just throw the ball a lot, so you have that going for you. I'm not really interested in JT Daniels, just the kind of player he is. If you have a guy that takes that many sacks and can't run, it's a real hindrance to your lineups when you have to just overcome that much negative yardage. They do have the potential to use a feature back in Tony Mathis, but kind of like Letty Brown last year, when they're underdogs and they're underdogs by a touchdown here, I'm worried about the efficiency, especially because Pitt's defense is very good, especially up front. If you want to stack him, I think you could use maybe Bryce Ford Wheaton. He's a little expensive. I actually prefer Sam James, who I think now, because of necessity, is going to have to play. This is a guy that actually had a really good season in 2019, and then he's been in the doghouse for the last 2 years. I'm not sure why, but he's only 4,500, so he would be the one-off I would use for this West Virginia team.
Don't have to convince me on Sam James. Always been a fan of that guy. I hope he has a big year for them. On the other side, talked about Slovis a little bit. He's another one on PrizePicks. His rushing prop, -3.5. Both quarterbacks, you won't be seeing them run at all tonight, but Pitt certainly has a stout offense. They got a couple real good backs. Addison not there, but what remains of the pass catchers, and where does Slovis rank in the QB ranks?
Slovis is just like JT Daniels. He takes a ton of sacks, so he has to overcome those with passing volume, and he's not in the air raid system he previously played in. It's fine, JT Daniels is. It's just, I think Pitt tries to slow this game so much so that it's probably overall a game to avoid. But Slovis, if they get down or for some reason or another, he could be GPP viable. But if Pitt's leading, I don't think they use him very much. Again, I like his under on PrizePicks. They do have some interesting receivers. DraftKings is assuming that Kanata Mumfield, the Akron transfer, is going to come right in and take over that Addison role based on his price. I'm not so sure. This guy was below average in terms of yards per route run at Akron, and it's Akron. I mean, it's pretty easy to get on the field there. I think Jared Wayne's probably the number one receiver. This guy caught 47 balls playing alongside Jordan Addison, and he had a better yards per route run. So I tend to think that Wayne is the number one over Kanata Mumfield. You can save 1.5K there. And then, I mean, the final starter is Bub Means. Love the name Bub. He's a Louisiana Tech transfer, 24 catches for him last year. He's 3,900 for a dart throw. He projects well enough where, Pitt doesn't really need to throw the ball all over the yard for Bub Means to get there.
No doubt about it. Any feel in terms of the 7.5 here?
I bet West Virginia. Don't love it, but it's not my favorite bet on the board, but I think it's value enough.
Tough game, no doubt about it. But I've gone back and forth. We had one quick question: Mathis or Steele for smaller field single entry?
I would go with the secure volume from Mathis.
I would agree. Close, but I would go with Mathis. This is going to be a real good game. Again, not the best DFS game, though. Now we shift gears completely. Now it gets a little dangerous. We've survived 3 games. We've talked about all teams that we see normally. Let's bring in South Carolina State has entered the chat. They're taking on UCF. They are, let me bring this up, 43.5 point underdogs with an over-under of 58. That means their implied total is quite low. Let's get them out of the way. Is there anyone on this team that is worth a look tonight in DFS?
Yeah, their implied team total is 9.5, which, believe it or not, is not the lowest on this slate. But no, not really. As a team, they're average in terms of both pass rate and play rate, little below average in play rate. Corey Fields is their signal caller. He averaged under 200 yards per game, not mobile. Running back, Kendrell Flowers is the guy. He actually catches a decent amount of passes, but he's 5,200. They're just flat out better values than him. And then their top receiver, Shaquan Davis, is somewhat interesting. He caught 43 balls, nearly 1,000 yards. But again, just this low team total makes him not project really well at all. So I'm completely off the team. We don't know clearly who the wide receiver 2 and 3 are. I think it's some combination of Richard Bailey, Hezekiah Massey, or Yancey Washington, who kind of plays like this flex tight end. He's only 230 pounds, but the uncertainty makes me basically want to avoid this whole team.
Yeah, I mean, it could be bad pretty quickly. A lot of uncertainty. On the other side, of course, we have the uncertainty of who will be playing late, but we, of course, know who should have the production early. This is a high-octane offense. Dylan Gabriel departs, but they still have plenty there. When you look at this team, what do you make of them, and how much is the offense going to kind of transform with the super runner possibly taking the helm in Plumlee?
Yeah, it's interesting with Malzahn. At Auburn, we've seen him tailor his offense to his quarterbacks. We've seen him with these run-heavy guys. We've seen him with pocket passers. So I'm not really worried. I do think they're going to embrace the run a little more, play balanced, play, neutral play rate here. But John Reese Plumlee is awesome from his mobility. He's a guy that Ole Miss actually moved to receiver just because he's so athletic and he wasn't going to play over Corral. What he gives you through the air is a bonus. Where we're really interested in is his legs. He rushed for over 1,000 yards and 12 scores on 154 attempts. That's elite dual threat territory. He doesn't actually have to do a ton with his arm to get there in DFS at this price, and he doesn't have to play the whole game. I'm fine with him in this spot. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks on the entire board.
If you do go to him, clearly you can run him, I think, naked, but would you look for a pairing as well, potentially on the outside?
I think you can. It's uncertain in this receiver. Ryan O'Keefe is the leader from last year's team, but they added Kobe Hudson, who was a leader for the Auburn team last year at receiver. He might just be more talented than O'Keefe and overtake him. I'm not sure. They're both expensive anyway. Like, they're kind of in the territory where you're getting close to Cropper and some of the other elite talents. I don't know if you want to pay that much. On FanDuel, Kobe Hudson is egregiously cheap. I like him a lot over there. But on DraftKings, Javon Baker's 3,500. He was listed as a clear starter. He's an Alabama transfer. Never really to get on the field there. I don't think that's any slight to him. It's just you're playing at Alabama, man. Not everyone can play there. So he's going to finally get his shot at 3,500. Javon Baker. He's the guy I think you can punt with.
Yeah, and we have him right now projected just north of 10%, so nothing crazy there. Real quick, I want to just ask you about a guy like Richardson in the backfield, him and Bowser. How do you think that breaks up? Is there enough there for those guys to be targeted?
For sure. I think they're both going to get there. It's just you're going to have a lot of backs get there on this slate. So you're rolling the dice with these guys. And you have other backs that aren't in timeshares. But Richardson outplayed Bowser last year. Richardson's just a little smaller. He catches a few more passes. But this honestly could be a Florida State situation where you have multiple backs over 100 yards rushing.
They're going to be able, they're picking their score tonight. This could get out of hand. Maybe not. I've seen some teams certainly not run it up too much, but again, some targetability. Looking at the ownership of these guys, nothing really stands out. I'm fascinated to see Plumlee. And I also want to say real quick, and not even real quick, let me tell you guys about this. I mentioned it in week 0, but if you're hopping in for the first time for our college football, now would be the time to take advantage, to get behind the paywall, to get the projections that Matt's doing, the ownership, the top stacks, everything that we have going on. You can get our weekly CFB package for $1 with the promo code Heisman. I know a lot of you have already done this and accessed this, but if you haven't, use that promo code Heisman for your first week of Stokastic Plus college football for a single $1. If you're playing or betting, I mean, it's $1. So I would hope you guys would check it out. If it's not for you, no harm. We hope you guys stick around. I think you'll really enjoy it. The man himself powers all of this, and I know you guys trust him just as much as I do. And then I give my egregious betting takes. They're sprinkled in there as well. But $1 for that promo code Heisman, and it's running out. You see, offer through 9/3. All right, 4 games down. We move on, but we're sticking with the same formula. Josh Ingeman was asking me crazy things before the show, and he asked me, what is VMI? Well, they are playing Wake Forest, 31-point dogs, 68.5-point total. So defense optional here. Does that mean that VMI for the FCS schools actually could be relevant on the slate?
They're a team that actually runs a lot of plays per game and passes a fair amount. So you might be able to get some value in the cheaper guys. Their quarterback, he's a tough guy to target, somewhat mobile here, but 6.5 yards per attempt, just over 2,000 yards passing. I think you could just do better than Seth Morgan at quarterback. You don't really need to play a guy like that. At running back, it's kind of a timeshare. So I'm probably not getting there either. Like Rashad Raymond rushed 90 times. Corey Briddy, he rushed 139 times. You can see it's pretty even there. But in the pass game, there's a couple interesting players here. Leroy Thomas should be their number 1 receiver. He actually projects fairly well, and that's on the back of that decent team total this team actually has. He's a guy that is going to play a little bit in the slot, had 557 yards on 81 targets last year. So he was pretty involved, even though they lost 2 of their top receivers. So he should be the clear alpha, in my opinion. And I don't know if you really want to get to anyone else. It's pretty unclear behind him.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, but we've seen, I mean, last year, Wake Forest had a really good year, but their defense was atrocious, and they play so fast and a lot's going on. And then one of the biggest news stories in the offseason is Sam Hartman, their stud quarterback, not being available. And we'll see what happens through the year, but he's certainly not playing tonight. What does that do to a team like this? I mean, the domino effect could be massive, but for this DFS slate, how do we plan accordingly if we want to target Wake?
So I don't know if they're going to change their approach. You're going to see Mitch Griffiths as the starter. He only has 15 career pass attempts, complete unknown. I think you could just play him based on that. If he's really good, he's pretty expensive anyway. I don't want to say he's never going to be this price again. He's $8,800, but you can play him based on the uncertainty. I don't think a lot of people are going to. Running back's tough for this team. Maybe they embrace it more, but they've kind of been priced up and out of play. They always use a timeshare. They've had most of their premier backs transfer out of the program because of their scheme. It's really beneficial to receivers, though. A.T. Perry's completely fine. Don't care who's under center. This guy's a complete monster. Nearly 1,300 yards last year. Extremely efficient. He's worth the price tag. 6'5", 206 pounds. He's going to beat up on some bad corners. Donovan Green's back. This was a guy that was expected to be the wide receiver 2 last year over A.T. Perry, but he missed the entire year with an injury. He's a complete burner, has like track speed. So he's kind of like your GPP archetype where you love to see these guys that get deep shots. That's Donovan Green. He's not going to be owned as much. And then Taylor Morin and Keyshawn Williams are 2 players at 4.4K, 3.7K. They're going to split this role, but you will see Wake Forest play some 4 wide. And it's such an efficient offense that both of them have had productive games in their careers. I think they're fine as punts.
When you look at this game, you see the 68.5-point total. Do you have interest in possibly like the full game stack where you load up, you go Griffiths and Green and Perry, and then you try to run it back with a VMI player or 2?
I think you can do that, and I don't think it's going to be very owned.
I would agree on both fronts. I think that if I was building one lineup, is that what I would do? Probably not. But when I look at this game, I do think there's scenarios where VMI can put up 20-ish points, give or take, maybe even a little more, and Wake can hang near 50. And if that happens, you might want a game stack there. Last question is kind of the same question. Do you anticipate having any lineups that target both of the quarterbacks in this game together?
No.
Okay, that's a little too far. Yeah,
I don't have any Griffiths myself, just for reference.
Oh, none at all. Okay.
I mean, I'm only playing 20. I'm making some lineups now, but
yeah, well,
right now I have 22. But so there's one thing I want to highlight. We got a question in chat, which I feel like I glossed over. It's back in the Oklahoma State backfield. Dominic Richardson is going to play today, but he was dealing with an injury earlier. So, and he's on the field for warm-up, so you don't have to worry about him playing. But Jaden Nixon's behind me. He's at 3,500. They're going to beat the tar out of Central Michigan. So, like if they get up 14-0, do you see a little extra Jaden Nixon? Maybe. So that's some late news. I'm going to be adjusting some lineups to get in some Jaden Nixon, but that's what I'm doing behind the scenes. I'm adding some of those.
Yes, that's why they pay you the big bucks. And it's true. Some of these guys with these teams, if we can get insight into some of the cheapies that access different permutations, and there's such big spreads here. Anything else from this game, or can we move on to Louisiana Tech?
We can move on.
All right. Louisiana Tech going to Missouri. I actually think Missouri, this is not my favorite betting slate. And certainly if you want all the betting picks, Odds Shopper YouTube, you get over there, me and Matt, our videos, all the VODs, all the betting content you would ever want. Go over there, and if you like it, subscribe, please. We're building that channel quickly. I think Missouri's got a real chance to cover the spread. I look for them to be improved, and I'm not really sold on I don't really see much with this Louisiana Tech team, but talk to me about what you see for them. How are they going to try to attack tonight?
Yeah, I bet Missouri, but I got it at 19.5. So a little bit of a slightly better line here.
Scores.
I do like what this Louisiana Tech team is doing. I like their head coach, Sonny Cumbie. He comes over from Texas Tech, has a history with like TCU. They're going to run a pass heavier scheme. And I just don't know if they have the guys to handle it right now. It's going to be an extended rebuild with this G5 program. They bring in Matthew Downing. No idea what he is. 44 career pass attempts, 16 career rush attempts. You can play him for the same reason you might play Griffiths, but with Downing, you're saving a lot more salary. Still, their implied team totals just around 20 points, and you have a lot of good options at QB, so I'm not sure I'm doing that. However, with them expected to throw a little bit here, I think you can target some of the receivers. Smoke Harris is their clear wide receiver one. I think he's somebody you can certainly get to. And then I don't mind Griffin Herbert, who they call him a tight end, but he plays like basically the big slot. He played 95% of his snaps in the slot. So just because he's a tight end, don't be scared off of Griffin Herbert. He's just a big wide receiver. He plays the way Kyle Pitts plays. He's definitely not that kind of talent, don't get me wrong, but that's his role. 3,700, he's pretty fine, I think, as a cheap play in this offense. And I am running Missouri stacks with run backs of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, Smoke Harris, first of all, obviously amazing name. So he's got that going for him. Reasonable price. You mentioned the Missouri stacks. Let's talk about Missouri. So it's a team that I do think when they get into SEC play, not to go on a tangent, an 11-game slate, it's going to be tough, but early in the year, I think you're going to see signs of what they're doing. I really like it. Now, Tyler Beatty departs. That opens up a ton of production for whoever takes the helm. And then you've got Cook under center. Where is this team at? I want to talk about, obviously, they have a super true freshman wide receiver. There's a lot of moving pieces for Missouri.
Yeah, that freshman, I'm excited to see him play.
Me too.
Brady Cook's barely played. He's a guy that looks like he might be mobile, 92 yards rushing and a touchdown on just 22 carries. That's pretty good. I mean, it's a small sample, so who knows? And he has a pretty good completion percentage. He just hasn't thrown the ball a lot. So Brady Cook's interesting. I think you can play him based on that little bit of rushing upside he showed. And I mean, they have one clear starter listed on their depth chart. That's Luther Burden, 5-star freshman, number 3 overall player in the country. This guy should get thrown the ball relentlessly. If he doesn't, Missouri's never going to get a 5-star again in the history of their program. So I think he's fine for tournaments. They rotate receivers a lot. I'm not really trying to play anyone else other than him. But in their backfield, you're probably going to see a timeshare to some degree. And they listed 3 co-starters. I'm not sure who's going to get the most work here. But again, they used Tyler Beatty in a workhorse role last year. If one of these guys is solid, you could see a guy emerge. I'm going to take a couple bets on Cody Schrader, the transfer from Truman State. He rushed for 2,000 yards and 25 touchdowns in his, I guess, lower level of college play last year, but I think he's going to get a look here. Also, they have Nathaniel Pete. He's just a little more expensive.
Yeah, and, he's sporting the Q tag. Obviously, we don't know about his workload potentially, so it could open up some production on the outside. You mentioned Burden, like does a guy like Toski Dove factor in or some of these other guys, or do you kind of just keep it to the names we know should see at least targets?
Yeah, I think you can go to a guy like Toski Dove. I don't love it, but he's in play.
Anything else here? I mean, again, I don't really. Oh, we did have a good question, and I actually agree. For an air raid offense, you got a guy like Matthew Downing. His passing yards prop sits at 215.5 on PrizePicks. They should be trailing. He should be throwing. I don't know how good he is or how efficient the offense is, but I do think he'll have ample opportunities to rack up the passing yards tonight.
He should have opportunities. He doesn't project very well in our back end, but again, like this is based on his minuscule sample. So probably one to avoid, but who knows?
Oh, anything I know you mentioned the backfield a little bit. Elijah Young, another name there. How much do you think he could work in?
No idea. They listed 3 co-starters here. He was the guy they gave the work last year when Beatty opted out of the bowl game, but they obviously weren't too happy with his play because they hammered the portal and brought in 2 running backs. So that I took that as a negative sign, but honestly, you never know.
Yeah, again, that's playing the guessing game. You mentioned like Pete comes in from Stanford. They've got guys coming in. I think he's got a fair shot, but at the same time, I would say this. I don't see anyone getting the Beatty treatment early, do you?
I don't. Unless it's like a hot hand, but no, I don't.
Yeah, that seems unlikely. We're both leaning. You said you already bet Missouri. I think anything inside 3 touchdowns is good enough for me in terms of the betting side.
For sure. Just took it expecting the line to move in. It did a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see. Louisiana Tech's no good. Anyway, best game of the night. Not the best game for DFS, but we're going to break it down. Big one, though. Penn State going into West Lafayette at night. Going to be a tough one. They are favorites, road favorites, -3.5. And let's talk about them. So Sean Clifford returns. Another guy like Spencer Sanders who's been there forever. They've got a super, like Missouri's wide receiver. Penn State has maybe the best freshman running back in the country. They've got other weapons on the outside. Let's talk about this offense. How do you think Clifford, and then we'll look tonight?
I hope Clifford plays the whole game. That's been, I think,
that's step one.
His biggest issue. I mean, he's been fine when he's on the field. I've played him a ton in DFS and done nothing but lost money because the guy can't finish a game. But I'm playing him tonight. He's a guy that has good mobility. He has nearly 900 rushing yards in his 3 seasons. And again, he hasn't played all that time. Solid passing numbers, like nothing crazy that stands out. But again, he's at 6,500. So what does he really have to do? And we know Purdue's going to throw the ball all over the yard. These are 2 pass-heavy offenses, both of them above average in plays per game. I personally think the total's a little low. So, I mean, Penn State's still nearly implied for 30 points, even with that kind of low total. Clifford's firmly in play. I like stacking with Mitchell Tinsley, who could be the wide receiver 1 year. He's that premier Western Kentucky transfer. They also retain Parker Washington. He's solid too. He's a guy that had 820 yards on 64 catches last year. Good efficiency there. The backfield's going to be a timeshare. They've talked about Nick Singleton like slowly working in. I honestly think Kevon Lee leads it with Singleton just right behind him. But I mean, he's the #1 running back recruit in the country. We could quickly have a Trevion Henderson situation on our hands where he's just too good to keep out the field, because at this point, we've seen a lot of Kevon Lee. We've seen no Nick Singleton.
When you look at the outside, you mentioned Washington. Certainly, I'm a big fan of Tinsley. He was just fantastic last year. Where does Lambert Smith factor in, if at all, then?
I think he's the wide receiver 3 for this team, but I mean, that could be productive, and he could be the wide receiver 2 if Tinsley doesn't pan out. He's not a guarantee, but I will say this. I do like him overall.
Chad just mentioned too, I was expecting this to have a much higher total. So was I. I'll be honest, with the profiles of these offenses, stable, QBs returning, I thought this would be more in the 55 to 60 range than 53. So I do kind of lean over there. Mentioned the backfield. I want to talk a little about just lineup construction. Is Clifford, do you think, in the conversation for cash viable?
I think he's on the outside looking in. I'm not going to play him in cash, but he's close.
On the flip side, in tournaments, do you see any merit to having Clifford, Washington, and Tinsley all together as a stack?
Yeah, for sure. I would probably use a Purdue run back, which I mean is completely fine.
Yep.
This is a game you can see paths to it eclipsing the total because of how pass heavy they are. So I think those are pretty solid ways to attack the game, honestly.
On the other side, again, Purdue is at home. They've got guys returning. certainly at the key positions, when you look at them, they've got a lot going. And Aiden O'Connell, if they win tonight, is going to have to play a big role. 6,100, certainly a name we need to talk about. And then we can talk about the backfield as well. But let's start with O'Connell. How do you think he's going to play, and where does he rank at his price point?
They're going to throw the ball all over the yard. Doesn't matter who plays. We got to look at that in the bowl game where they didn't have David Bell or Milton Wright. Didn't matter. Didn't change the offense. O'Connell was throwing it to whoever he possibly could. I think they're going to continue to do that. The real question to me is who emerges as the number one pass catcher? Like, O'Connell's stackable for sure. It's just he's not mobile whatsoever, so he's a little bit behind these guys. I'd rather play Clifford. But if you're running Clifford stacks, I have a lot of interest in run backs here. Payne Durham is maybe the most secure option because he plays the tight end. We know he's going to be on the field. But with that said, I don't think he really has that kind of David Bell upside. The receivers I'm most interested in are Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy. Both of them come over from Iowa. There's a big price difference between them. And honestly, I'm not sure which one would be the wide receiver one. I think you can make the case that Charlie Jones might emerge as the wide receiver one this year. But again, this is completely volatile. I do have some Charlie Jones. I have a little bit of Tyrone Tracy. I have more Charlie Jones overall, but they just throw the ball so much. I want to play these guys.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned we know what they're going to do. They could win the game, but they also could be trailing throughout. And regardless, they're a team that wants to throw the ball. But I want to ask you about, well, you got King Doru, and then you got Kobe Lewis at that flat min that you seem to really like via our projection. So talk to me about the Purdue backfield and what you expect there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny backfield. I think it's going to be a timeshare. It's been a timeshare really as long as I can remember. And that's what the reports out of camp. King Doru's been inefficient. Kobe Lewis didn't play football last year in a really pass-heavy offense. I'm not too excited about the prospects of this game over, I guess I should say, this area of the game.
Anything with Downing factoring in as well? You mentioned the crowded backfield. Or
is it just really... He could play, yeah.
But it looks like, just to sum up this game, you're more interested in the passing attacks for both sides rather than the backfields for either team.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And last thing, and I know you did this because I watched your video this morning on the Odd Chopper YouTube. You are on Penn State, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay. It's a tough game. I didn't bet it. I couldn't do it.
I've been pretty vocal about Penn State. I think they're awesome.
Well, remember, if it works, you can follow at Matt_Gajewski. If it doesn't, you send your hate tweets there. Who would we stack with O'Connell? We did just talk about this. It's very, I think, up in the air. For me, if I was picking one guy, it would actually be Charlie Jones. I like the price point. I think for the ceiling, he's got the best boom bust potential, but I don't think we have a ton of clarity just because the Rondell Moores and the Bells are just simply not in this offense yet.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you on Charlie. He's my favorite guy to target of this group. But again, it's really volatile, and that comes down a lot to price. He's really cheap. So what are you really losing if Charlie Jones doesn't pop off?
Why not Durham as wide receiver one? I mean, you mentioned that. I just think it's possibly a ceiling issue, if anything.
Yeah, he plays tight end. So very rarely do you see tight ends lead their team in college football. Can it be done? Maybe, but I wouldn't say it's the most likely outcome.
Last guy from this game, and we'll move on. And we've glossed over him a little bit, but where do you think Brock Thompson is? He just another guy that could potentially impact down the outside?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's an incumbent player, and he's a guy that caught 30 balls last year for 457 yards. He's 6'3", so he's big. He actually previously started at Marshall in his career. I think if you're just looking at the profiles of these guys, Charlie Jones is a slightly better bet for the price. Brock Thompson at 4,900. He could emerge, but you also have to pay more for that. So I'm trying to take cheap shots on Purdue because of the uncertainty.
This is the actual final question. I asked this in the VMI and weight game. You said no. Do you anticipate possibly having any lineups with Clifford and O'Connell together?
I don't think I have any, but I'm not opposed to that.
I think this is another game that you can stack up, and you could do it like that. Target both passing attacks and just go for it. In GPPs, I think that is viable.
I think it is too. I'll check. I don't think I have any of that though.
Okay, fair enough. We got 4 games left. We're doing very well for time. We'll have time at the end. Get in some questions, certainly, if you have them. And again, if you're enjoying the show, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Hit that thumbs up. That's the easiest way to support us. It just helps us out. We really do appreciate it. And we got a lot of viewers. It's going to be a big year here at Stokastic for college football. I can't wait. Listen up now, because I can guarantee you will never hear us talk about Eastern Illinois ever again on this show. This is your one chance to get in those takes for the Fighting Tony Romos. They're playing Northern Illinois, 35-point dogs, over under a 54. I assume it's going to be pretty tough to get viable targets on this team, or is there someone that's worth some shares tonight?
I don't think so. They have Ira Armstead as their quarterback. He formerly played at Virginia. He's mobile, but just really low team total. Former Syracuse player, Mackenzie Pierre is their running back, but he was in a timeshare. He couldn't even win the job there. Isaiah Hill's their leading receiver, but he's a little expensive, honestly. Dwayne Cooks projects better than him, but their team total is 9.25. Again, if you're looking for FCS teams, like VMI is probably the team you're looking at, just because their team total is actually 17. So, I mean, you got 2.5 scores with VMI. You don't have hardly any with this team. It's just a fade for me.
Yeah, it's tough to really go there, just because even if these teams hang in the game, it usually doesn't come via offense. It comes because the other team is just not punching it in. You could easily see this team score under 10 points, obviously, but we do have a relevant side on the other side in Northern Illinois, a team that, they're always in contention in the MAC, a solid team that we don't see a lot on these slates, but they certainly have relevancy here. Tucker on the outside, maybe some of the backs. What are we looking at for the quarterback situation? How do you break down this team in a massive favorite spot?
I think they're going to run the ball as much as they possibly can. They're an extremely run-heavy team, a 36% pass rate last year. That was 125th. Lombardi is involved in that a little bit, but he's a guy that was either like over 350 yards because their defense was giving up a ton of points, or he was under 200. He had 8 games passing below 200 yards. I think he's really inflated in terms of price and projection for this game. Maybe he throws a long touchdown to begin with, but he also lost his top 2 receivers. He just has Cole Tucker back there. I think this team rides Antonio Brown and Harrison Whaley here. They listed Antonio Brown as the clear starter over Whaley, a surprise to me, apparently a surprise to DraftKings because they listed Antonio Brown cheaper. He's $5K, and he is one of the best projections on this slate, cost adjusted. Brown is 220 pounds. He averaged 6.6 yards per carry last year. I mean, he is awesome. And they don't have a pass catching back. So one of these guys, I think, has to take over this role. I don't know who it's going to be. Whaley is smaller. He just has battled so many injuries. Maybe Whaley takes it, but I don't think there's any clear delineation here. Antonio Brown is a guy that has a massive projection. I love him on this slate, and he's extremely cheap for that price.
I assume then that puts him squarely in the conversation for cash.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it does seem like this is a pretty easy game to script in the sense of we know what Northern Illinois wants to do. You mentioned the ground attack. I don't see a lot of merit to going the other way, but do you, in terms of omitting him and going to the pass catchers?
Not really. Like Cole Tucker's 7,300. That's a ton to pay for the wide receiver 1 on this team. And then we don't know who the wide receiver 2 is. I think you could guess that it's Shamar Thornton, the FIU transfer. But I mean, his best season came in 2019 where he had 661 yards. He hasn't been able to do anything since. Fabian McCray was their final starter listed. He's 6,400, but he played less than Messiah Travis, Muhammad Torre, who are still on the team. So I'm not confident in this depth chart. And, some teams we can trust, some teams we can't. I don't buy what Northern Illinois is doing here. And honestly, at running back, I think it could go either way. For those of you in your large field tournaments, you could get a lot of leverage by playing Harrison Whaley. He's going to play regardless, but I don't know if I buy this depth chart necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that the way to target this is certainly on the ground. I think that's the optimal route that Northern Illinois will take. I think they clearly are going to cruise in the game. How much? I think that's up for a matter of debate. I'm not betting this game by any stretch of the imagination. So nothing else there, but I will say, and I know a lot of you have already signed up for that $1 with the weekly package with Heisman. Antonio Brown projects phenomenal in our projections, and he's going to be popular, but it seems like it's warranted.
Yeah, I certainly think so. Like worst case scenario, we don't buy the depth chart. He's still going to play no matter what. And he's going to be at least a 50-50 timeshare. And I mean, like this team is projected for so many rushing yards right now on the back end, just because they're running the ball essentially 66% of the time. They both projected for over 100 yards at one point in time. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but that just speaks to how many rushing yards this team actually projects for because they're so run heavy.
We go back
both,
to
both ahead, over 100 yards still.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. It could be a long day for Eastern Illinois' front, but now we go back to non-FCF schools. We got, even though New Mexico State's on the cusp, they did play okay. We saw them in week 0. That's one of the interesting things about this next game. New Mexico State already played. They played Nevada. They had 5 turnovers. Now they got to go on the road to Minnesota, and they're 36-point dogs, which I will say I think is too much. Over under a 52. So we got some insight into this team, and I actually want to start with New Mexico State and specifically their quarterback situation. It was going so bad that they benched Pavia and they went to this other dude, and he actually looked all right. I watched some of that game. He was producing late in the game. Do you think that they stick with him? I believe his name is Frakes. Stick with him, and does that make him playable tonight?
I don't think he's playable, but I think he's certainly better for New Mexico State. I bet them plus 36.5.
So
their team total is 9. So it's right up there with these FCS teams that we're just Xing out. I think you can largely do that with this team. We don't know much about Frakes yet. He played just much better than Pavia, rushed twice for 15 yards. Maybe he's mobile. That's not a big sample. Their running backs are in a timeshare, not targeting them. At receiver, maybe you could target one of Cordell David or Justice Powers. They both had 80% route rates or more. They're each below 4K. Cordell David's at 3,700. Justice Powers is the Stone Min. I don't think you need to do that. Like, I would rather play like guys on Louisiana Tech or Purdue that are below 4K, or Baker for UCF with more explosive upside, than get to one of these guys who's probably going to finish with like 5 for 50.
It's hard to argue with that. I will say again, they weren't that bad. This is more on the betting side. I just 5 turnovers in a game. Nevada's garbage. I'll admit that, but I think that New Mexico State might be slightly improved off what was one of the worst teams in the country last year. It doesn't really mean much here when you're 36-point dogs, but let's see what they can give them. They do have 9 starters back on a defense that's going to be tasked with stopping a ground attack for Minnesota and another quarterback that has just been there forever in Tanner Morgan. So he's there. You got Otton Bell. You've got a slew of backs that return from injury. Break it down any way you want, but how do you think Minnesota chooses to attack this defense?
Well, I think they're going to run, even though they changed OCs to Kirk Shiraka, their previous OC, honestly, the OC that kind of coaxed Tanner Morgan to some of his best seasons. But with that said, they're huge favorites. Minnesota's important games coming up. I don't think they're really going to put the hammer down on New Mexico State through the air. So off Morgan, their run game should be the key of their whole offense. But who do we see lead this? Muhammad Ibrahim is extremely expensive at 9,500. We've seen him operate in a bell cow fashion, but this guy's coming off a torn Achilles. Luckily, that did happen in week 1, so it's not like we're dealing with a really quick recovery from an Achilles, but a torn Achilles is a torn Achilles. I do think we see some Trey Potts, Bryce Williams, Zach Evans. How much, I'm not sure, but I don't think this is just Muhammad Ibrahim 35 carries like we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned we did see that at times, and Potts behind him. It's tough. I do agree that they're going to attack on the ground, but does that render the pass catchers useless, or is there something to say about like an Otton Bell?
He's great when they're coaxed into better game scripts. Like, he's a 2.6 yards per route run, which is really, really efficient. It's just he has games where he's 2 for 16, and then he has games where he's like 4 for 96 in a score. So he's extremely volatile and hard to target. 6,300 is a lot to pay for him. And then behind him, they rotate 3 other receivers, and Mike Brown-Stevens, Daniel Jackson, and Dylan Wright. They have a receiving tight end in Brevin Spanford, who's pretty good here. They actually have a really good receiving core. I just don't think that they use it to the most of their potential.
Yeah, I'm with you. Last question, then we'll get to the final 2. Any interest in Tanner Morgan? Or it looks like he's not going to be popular, but I don't really like the spot.
Yeah, even if he's not popular, I'm not interested.
Time, everybody. Here we go. Lumberjack season. Northern Arizona's on the slate. They take on Arizona State. It's not as bad. It's only 24.5. And I actually think the FCS school could represent themselves pretty well here. Over under a 53. But for the DFS side, does Northern Arizona have anyone that we need to take notice of?
RJ Martinez is okay. But again, 12.5 point implied team total. This guy averaged 213.5 passing yards per game, only finished with 187 rushing yards. That's good, but in a matchup against an FBS team, that's not what you want. And they actually got a really good recruit. Angel Flores is a 3-star recruit. He was actually recruited by some Power 5 schools. I think he might play a little bit in the game. That the coach didn't say that, but I mean, that's not the kind of recruit that Northern Arizona gets every day. So I'm worried about there being a timeshare. To me, that's enough to ignore it. Running back, I think this is going to be a timeshare. Going to ignore that. And then in the receiving room, their number one wide receiver, Trey Petaway, is not in the DraftKings player pool.
Bold strategy. On the other side, Arizona State, I think, is going to be awful this year. I'm not sure they get exposed tonight, but I don't think it's impossible either. I'm interested to see, though, how much Valladay transforms the offense. The Wyoming transfer comes in on the ground. Is it his backfield right off the jump, or is he in a timeshare?
Yeah, I think he's going to be the lead back right away. Just they're going to beat this team badly, I think. So you're going to see guys come in behind Valladay. Like Daniel Nada's probably going to play a little bit. Maybe you see some George Hart. These are guys I expect to just take over the end of the game. But Valladay should handle a monster workload. We've seen him do it in the past with Wyoming, playing in similar offense here. And he catches passes. He had 23 catches last year. The efficiency should be there against this weak team. He's one of the better price-adjusted plays on the board behind this enormous team total.
Do you think you would go to Emery Jones? Obviously, the former Florida quarterback is there to take over as Daniels departs. He's mobile. Do you see that kind of cannibalizing it, or is he just someone you could run alone and hope he falls in the end zone 3 times?
I think you can do that with Emery. He's an excellent runner overall. I think he's better than Jaden Daniels. Whatever he gives you through the air is a bonus here. He's kind of like a John Brees Plumlee light, in my opinion.
We got on PrizePicks, Emery Jones, 44.5 rushing yards. You got Valladay at 80.5. I don't mind going over there, particularly with Valladay. Slim, friend of the show, just pointed that out. Even though I like Northern Arizona to hang, I think Valladay should eclipse the 100-yard mark in a lot of scenarios tonight.
Yeah, that was my second favorite PrizePicks.
Yeah, that's a good find. I'm definitely on board there. All right. Anything else from this game? I know you're not betting it. You're not going to jump on the Lumberjacks with me?
Maybe you can talk me into it. This game doesn't kick off right away, but I don't have it on my card now. The only FCS team I have on my card is San Jose State.
Oh, yeah. I bet them as well. Got inside 3 touchdowns against Portland State. They're not on the slate, but I'm with you. Go Spartans. Cal Poly is on the slate. They're real bad. They take on Fresno. It's going to be bad. We could probably get them out of the way pretty quickly. Is there anything on this team that we need to talk about?
No, we don't even need to waste time.
Good. They're gone. They get the Bowling Green treatment. Fresno State, of course, has a super stud QB. How long he's going to play is a matter of how bad it gets. He's 9,100. Where does Haener fit in here?
Yeah, he just doesn't run as much as the other guys that might get pulled. So that is a concern. Cropper, his receiver, projects really well because they're so pass heavy. Love him. Kelly, it's a little expensive, but he's a solid wide receiver too. And Jordan Mims should be taking over for Ronnie Rivers. He's an excellent play as well.
Anything on the, you mentioned Mims. Is Fresno a team, even though they're in such a ridiculous game, that we want pieces of, or are they just in the same pool as UCF and these teams that, it's going to be hard to stack because how do they all get there in one half of play potentially? Yeah,
that's exactly it.
All right.
Go ahead. I think they're going to play enough where if they're on the field for 3 quarters and they're getting taken out, they probably did something good enough to get taken out on the way there, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. That is one thing that I think is somewhat counterintuitive, where it's they're not going to play the second half. If they score 50 points in the first half, it doesn't really matter in some regards. So you can definitely look at that. Valladay over 74.5 rushing per receiving yards. Yes, that's what you want to be doing for sure. Got a couple minutes for questions. I will try to get to as many. Here we go. Luther Burden or Tinsley in a GPP?
Burden. He'll be less owned, I think.
He will be less owned. Parker Washington or Donovan Green?
Tournament, I would go Donovan Green. Parker Washington's going to be more owned. I love Parker Washington, but that's just the deciding factor.
Donovan Green, before the injury was going to have a monster year. And I really hope he gets back. Hooker or Plumlee?
Hooker.
In terms of, we had a lot of questions on and for cash. Where do you go at quarterback potentially? I know we've talked about Sanders and we've talked about O'Connell. We've talked about Hooker. Like of the guys, if you had to put, say, you're going to play 2 QBs, of course, but who's the one quarterback that you maybe really think should be towards the top?
Yeah, I like John Reese Plumlee a lot.
Okay, there you go. Wide receiver question potentially for cash. Ja'Shawn Jackson or Leroy Thomas?
Leroy Thomas projects slightly behind Ja'Shawn Jackson. I had some of those come up in my lineup, so I looked actually ahead of the show.
Brew, this is an interesting one. Brew McCoy, who I'm very interested to see tonight, or Javon Baker?
Brew McCoy.
Corey Balmer, appreciate that super chat. Mims and Plumlee or Spencer Sanders and a flex on DK?
I think it's just one of the 3. It would be Plumlee for me.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, you're going to want to put a second QB in there. I see what's going on. See, this is why we got you on the show. I don't even know how to decipher the questions. Reports are saying Plumlee might only play 1 half. How much does that potentially deter you?
I didn't see that. So, I mean, since he put that in chat, I've been looking both on Twitter and across like the UCF beats. I don't see that anywhere, but that doesn't mean it's not there. I mean, if you want to throw that in chat, that would be phenomenal, but that is not a report I've seen.
In the backfield, would you rather go with Small or Valladay?
Valladay.
Pitt starts their march towards the playoff tonight. Yeah, that's why kids stay in school. Don't be saying crazy things on national TV because Pitt might lose tonight. Valladay or Lou Nichols in cash?
They have a pretty sizable gap in salary, but it would be Valladay for me.
Yeah, Valladay's in a really good spot tonight. And I will say, shout out to Desmond Howard for his insane playoff. That was only one of the crazy things that he said. I like the fire, but his playoff thing was absolutely ridiculous.
Things he said.
I saw. I think we've got. Oh yeah, Brew McCoy. We talked about that. Jaden Nixon. You talked about him early in the show. You sounded like you were pretty encouraged. He's someone that could easily crack the lineups tonight.
Yeah, I'm playing a little bit of him just because of the off chance that Dominic Richardson doesn't play a ton. He was injured.
Yeah, I think we're up to speed here. We've talked about Brock Thompson. We've talked about the Purdue. They do use the tight end. They've got several wide receivers. Can get there. How many carries do you guys think Singleton gets tonight? That's a good question. I have no idea. You mentioned Travion Henderson. I think it could mirror that where he's going to slowly take over, but it might not be in week 1.
I would guess around 10.
Yeah, that
10
seems
total
fair.
touches.
10 total touches. It's going to be a good game. I don't think it makes him super favorite live play tomorrow. Lahiri.
That's a question for you, Ben.
Yeah, no, that you're my man. Yeah, go with Lahiri. No, I didn't really look at Boston, but if I have anything, I will post it. We've done it 11 up, 11 down. I want to say, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you did, come back tomorrow. Every time college football is kicking off, me and Matt will be here. We will be breaking down all the slates on this channel and on Odd Chapter. So I want to give a special shout out to Jordan Klein behind the glass. Does a great job as always. Powers this show and PrizePicks for sponsoring us. But we are about to kick off the games. Good luck tonight. If you have questions, follow Matt at Matt_Gajewski. I suggested it. So if you want to follow me at DFS, there you have it. Good luck tonight. 11 games up, 11 games down. We will talk to you guys tomorrow. Let's cash some tickets in the meantime, and we'll see you soon. Watch.